I lay there too frozen to move as the whispers turned to a loud taunt. "Buster, Buster, it's me, Buster." As the taunting continued, I pulled myself together enough to plant my feet on the bedroom floor. I inched down slowly to look under the bed when I suddenly heard my dad's voice permeate from under the bed. "Remember what will happen to you if you move from the bed." Suddenly, a deathly cold hand grabbed me by my ankle and I let out a blood-curdling scream. I felt like that same scared child who would lie in bed every night praying the monsters wouldn't get. I screamed until the lights of my bedroom suddenly switched on and my mother was standing in the doorway of my bedroom looking at me as if I had gone crazy. Maybe I am crazy, I thought to myself the following night as I tried once again to get some sleep. As I lay there, the thought of the cold hand grabbing my leg plagued my mind. As the familiar feeling of dread crept up my spine, a different sound caught my attention. This time it came from above, like something being dragged along the floor in the attic. I could hear footsteps pacing back and forth across the ceiling. It was then I remembered what my dad would tell my brother about demons in the attic. As an adult, it wouldn't be something to think twice about, but the fear that now gripped my soul had me doubting everything. I decided to go check the attic door outside my room. I prayed to God that the wooden cover was still in place, but to my horror, the attic was wide open. My heart was racing as I peered into the darkness. The pitch blackness of the attic was playing tricks on my mind as it morphed into grotesque shapes. Suddenly, a pair of glowing red eyes peered out from the darkness. Maybe my dad never got rid of that terrible Halloween mask, I thought to myself as I grabbed a chair from my room. As I pulled myself into the dark abyss of the attic, I felt something brush past me. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I could see a figure huddled in the corner. For a moment, I thought it was the darkness playing tricks on me, until the sound of crying jolted me back to reality. The crying got louder as I got closer, and as my eyes adjusted more to the darkness, my heart began to race as the figure in the corner looked like my father. "Dad, Dad, is that you?" I reluctantly called out. I couldn't believe what I was saying. As I got closer, the crying got louder. I began to shake uncontrollably as I reached out my hand to touch whoever was crying in the corner. Suddenly, my fear turned to a strange relief when my brother turned to me with red, tearful eyes. "What the hell are you doing up here, Mike? This is weird even for you." Mike had a confused look on his face. He looked around the attic as if seeing it for the first time. "I was having a terrible dream about Dad." I was even more confused as my brother lives about 5 miles from the house and rarely visits. Mike looked at me again as he began to come around to his senses. He seemed even more confused than me. "How did I get here?" The last thing I remember was lying in bed thinking about how Dad died. After everything had calmed down, we sat at the kitchen table reminiscing about our childhood. We talked about all the terrible things Dad did to us as kids, trying to make sense of everything. "Do you think it's strange how Dad died? I mean, why did he want to kill himself?" None of it made sense to me either. Although my dad was strange, he never seemed sad enough to want to kill himself. When he wasn't trying to scare us into compliance, he wasn't the worst dad. I mean, there were a few good moments, a few good memories. As we continued to talk, our mom came into the kitchen. She looked glad to see her 2 boys sitting at the table like we did when we were kids. "My 2 wonderful boys," she said as she draped her arms over our shoulders. Mike looked at our mom as if she would have all the answers. What was Dad doing by the tree that night? "Mom," I could feel my mom's body tense up as the words left my brother's mouth. "Some things aren't worth dwelling on. Your father was a complicated man. The past is the past, and that is where we're going to leave it. My mother was always great at sidestepping the truth. Emotions were not her strong point, but I suspect it was a defense she had built up to deal with my dad. When I was younger, I remember walking into the living room and my dad was waving a gun, about while my mom begged him to stop. I remember the fear in her face. Maybe I was too young to realize what was happening, but now I'm beginning to think she had it a lot worse. A few days had passed and my anxiety seemed to be getting worse. Sleeping seemed like an impossibility. The thoughts of it filled me with unbearable dread. My heart was beating to the sound of the ticking clock on the wall, when suddenly the sound under my bed returned. The scratching and knocking came in turns like it was trying to get my attention. I put it down to my mind still playing tricks. I needed to see for myself that I was just imagining it. As I bent down to look under my bed, I heard my father's voice again. This time it was loud and clear. "Buster, I didn't want to do it. I didn't want to leave your mother." As my dad's voice rang in my ear, I peered under the bed. I didn't know what to believe when I saw my dad staring back at me. His face was all twisted. My body went numb with fear as he reached out to me. "Buster," he called out again as he tried to crawl towards me. "Look out the window. Save me, Buster." I jumped up on the bed as my dad's face came within inches of mine. I looked out the window to the lonely oak tree that sat in the center of the back garden. A different kind of fear gripped my body as I watched my mother placing a nose around her neck. I screamed and banged on the window to get her attention. She looked at me with a sort of relief on her face, like all the pain she had felt was going to come to an end. My brain was swirling as I ran to the garden. I grabbed her legs as I pleaded with her not to die. Her face was already blue as I looked for something to cut her down. I fumbled about in a panic for what felt like hours. I tried everything to save her, but eventually it was too late. Later that night, after the cops and paramedics were finished with their inquiries, I sat alone in my mom's bedroom contemplating how everything had gone so wrong. "What will I tell Mike?" I thought to myself before spotting a note on the dresser. The note was made out to myself and Mike. I could barely read what was written on it through the tears in my eyes. "To my beautiful boys, I tried my best to protect you growing up. I tried to shield you from the scary nightmares your father tried to fill your head with, and I feel like I failed you. When he wasn't dreaming up monsters to scare you, he was dreaming up demons to scare me. He held me captive through fear of being left to bring you boys up alone. He used the threat of suicide to keep me trapped. The night he died, I called his bluff and gave him the final push. He begged me to save him, but I turned my back until he was gone. I wish everything could have been different, but now we are all free." It all made sense to me now. My father was a deeply terrifying human being when growing up. He never hit us, but he went out of his way to scare us into compliance. Not by using threats, but by doing strange things like hiding under our bed, making noises at night, and then telling us that it was the monster that ate children who wouldn't go to sleep. I had an older brother who had a habit of sneaking downstairs at night for food, which would make my dad furious. The entrance to our attic was right outside our bedroom door, and one night my dad took the wooden cover off and placed a terrifying Halloween mask looking down into the hall and told us it was the attic demon waiting to grab our souls if we dared to walk past it at night. I had to hand it to my dad because it bloody worked, and my brother would be too terrified to even open the bedroom door at night. By the time I was in my teens, I think the worst thing he ever told us was that if we ever tried to sneak out at night, the monsters that lived in the house would be so angry they would kill him and our mother, and we would come back to find them hanging dead from the tree in our backyard. All I knew was fear at night growing up, and I think it had impacted me as an adult. I hate sleeping so much that if I could live my life without it, I would. My sleep troubles got worse when my dad died and I moved back home to be a presence in the house for my mother. I'd often tried talking to my mother about the tricks Dad played on us as kids, but I suspected the mind games my dad played on my mom were a lot worse. When he died, she never really shed tears for him, and she almost looked relieved when he was lowered into the ground during his funeral. All she would say was that the stories he told us growing up became his nightmare, and if you say something enough, it becomes a reality you can't escape from. I had lived out of state and didn't have much contact with the family. The circumstances around my dad's death were unexpected. He hung himself from the tree he told us he would be found hanging from if we tried to sneak out. I had been back to sleeping in the room I shared with my brother as a kid. The anxiety started the same night I began hearing noises under the bed. It brought back memories of the noises my dad would make when he hid there trying to scare us. This went on for weeks, and every time I began to drift off. I didn't give it much thought and believed it was just my mind playing tricks on me. Then one night the noises turned to whispers, like someone under my bed whispering to themselves. My anxiety then turned to paralyzing fear when I heard the name Buster creep from the darkness of the room. It was a name I hadn't been called since I last saw my father. It was the nickname my dad would call me when he wasn't trying to terrify me.